Hey everyone, welcome to Pastors Podcast Season 3. I'm Banning Liebscher. We have the honor this season of partnering with World Vision. World Vision is a Christian humanitarian organization, and we get to partner with them to serve children and families around the world that are dealing with poverty and injustice. Over half of the world's children experience some form of violence every year, including sexual assault, gang violence, domestic abuse, early marriage, and trafficking. With more families facing poverty due to the pandemic's economic effects, kids are more vulnerable than ever before to abuse, enslaved labor, and sex trafficking. By the end of 2022, child labor alone could exploit nearly 9 million more children than years prior, as well as enforcing longer work hours and worsening conditions for those who have already been forced into the darkest side of this world. Millions of parents are faced with the impossible choice of selling a child for food or seeing their families starve, trapped by violence, war, and suffering. Millions of children, most of them girls, are enslaved in the global sex trade. World Vision will stop at nothing to protect children by looking out for their well-being, ensuring that communities are actively working to identify and support children in need, advocating for their rights, and providing immediate aid such as emergency shelter and essential care. World Vision's approach to ending violence against children protects them today and empowers them for tomorrow. They do this by equipping them, their communities, and local partners with the tools to address the root causes of violence against children. At Jesus Culture, we are grateful for the work that World Vision is doing around the world to address the issue of child vulnerability. God's heart is for the vulnerable and oppressed. We realize that not everyone can be on the front lines in dealing with these situations, but it's imperative as a church that we engage by partnering with those who are on the front line. Whether you want to give on your own, with your family, community group, or as a church, your one-time donation to the World Vision Fund will create lasting change alongside kids and communities around the world, including preventing abuse, restoring physical and spiritual health to rescued girls by providing interventions like safe shelter, medical care, nutritious food, vocational training, compassionate counseling, and when possible, reintegration with a loving family. In fact, thanks to public grants, your gift will multiply 5 times in impact to provide specialized, preventative, and restorative programs, giving them hope for a better tomorrow. At Jesus Culture, we want to say thank you for partnering with World Vision as they are on the front line of taking care of the children around the world that are on God's heart. Give now by visiting worldvision.org/JCPN and donate today. Welcome to Pastors Podcast Season 3, part of the Jesus Culture Podcast Network. I feel like I need a new intro. It's just that for all of the episodes, it's Welcome to Pastors Podcast Season 3, part of the Jesus Culture Podcast Network.
It's run its course.
It's run its course. I need some type of, I listen to a lot of sports radio, or we need some type of a little bit more,
We need and we're back.
Yeah, something like that. So, well, welcome. Great to have you. I'm Banning Liebscher, the pastor of Jesus Culture. Listen, this is a podcast for pastors, by pastors, talking all things that not just pastors, but also anybody that's working in the local church or in the trenches, whether you're paid or not paid, but just have a heart to build the local church. Our heart's to really come alongside you. These were our 6 words we've been using that we want to do. We want to encourage you, inspire you, challenge you, provoke you, connect you, and equip you. There you go. I nailed the 6.
Love it.
So that's really our heart. It's great to have, as always, fellow senior pastors with me as co-host, a long-time host of the Pastors Podcast, over here to my right, if you're watching on stream, Phil Manginelli, pastor of The Square in not just Atlanta, Georgia. Are you in a bedroom community?
Give me some Smyrna. I don't know what that is. I've heard the phrase. If I'm honest, I would just roll in and say yes.
Is it a sleepy bedroom community?
We are the first city outside of Atlanta on the northwest side.
Okay.
So we're a true suburb, but our church obviously bleeds in and out of the city. I'd say a third of our church is in the city, two-thirds of our church is outside the city.
All right. Yeah. Well, good. Welcome. Great to have you, as always. And a brand new host, first time ever with us.
Let's go.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Osvaldo Mata, and I pastor in the city of Napa, California.
Napa, California.
Yeah.
So first of all, let's just go over a few things. First of all, Osvaldo, which I call you Oz because that's what you've told me. And I feel like I'm going to butcher. I tried to say your last name multiple times, and you just kind of looked at me like
just
condescendingly.
What I loved is that when you said it, and then Oz, when you responded, that it was incorrect. Banning's like, no, we just said the exact same thing. I don't hear the difference between what you just said.
Banning's like, that's what I said. That's exactly what I said.
So, man, great to have you. Tell us a little bit about your pastor in Napa, which, by the way, can I just say real quick, I imagine that pastoring in Napa has its own unique. For those, I think everybody around the world would know Napa. Napa is famous. It's wine country. It's destination place. People from all over the world would fly into Napa for the Michelin star restaurants and for the wine tours and all that type of stuff. An amazing place, not far from us. But what's it like to pastor? We're going to get into the Hispanic, Latino kind of world, but what's it like just to pastor in Napa just in general? Like, I got to be honest with you, it doesn't feel like it's really fair. Is that the right word?
It's kind of like Bob Goff saying he's the pastor of Disneyland. And you're like, I hate you.
It's obviously it's Napa. You know, it's beautiful. But you know, within all that beauty, like there's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of things that go unnoticed and unseen. Obviously, because we got people flying in, it's very touristic. People come in and, you know, it's a lot of like peeling back the layers and the onion of really what's going on within our city. So you have to like really search for things that are going on and within our community. But it's beautiful, man. We love leading there. We love pastoring there. But it's Napa. You can't complain, man.
Come on. How long have you been pastoring your church?
So we planted 9 years ago.
Now, you have an interesting story. When I first met you, I was so intrigued by it because you're coming from, you're a pastor's kid.
Yeah.
And coming from a traditional Pentecostal Hispanic church.
Yeah.
Here's what I would love. I don't know how many are listening right now that are coming from a situation like you, that are coming out of maybe that traditional ethnic, that traditional kind of church and kind of coming into this, whatever this next generation was. I imagine was that a hard transition?
Oh, it definitely was.
Because if you're watching, you'll get this, but ripped jeans, beard, sneakerhead shoes, like all this type of stuff. Like at the end of the day, I imagine that's not how you grew up.
No.
In church.
No. Church was, there was a certain dress code. There was an attire. It was, we grew up with a suit and tie, and this is the way you look. This is the type of haircut you get. This is how you sit in church. It was just like this dress code that you had with whatever you did within the church. And, obviously as a young kid, you're obviously trying to fight all of that, right? It's like, dude, I just want to get up and like just get to church. Like, I don't care how I go. I just want to go, which is way different from my kids now. My son gets up and he goes in his shorts. And, it's baseball cap and, no, not when I was growing up. Definitely was.
You ever
not
want to
the
yell at
case.
them every once in a while? They just want to come out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm like, dude, you're gonna go to church like that?
I still to this day, like, I'll wear a T-shirt. I grew up pretty strict legalistic Baptist.
Yeah.
The one thing I will not do is I will not wear shorts and I will not wear a hat when I'm preaching. It's like I don't know, like I'll wear a T-shirt, I'll wear I've already broken all the Baptist rules I grew up with, but for whatever reason, I don't know why, a hat and shorts are just, that's too far.
It's the fundamentalist baggage still there.
It's still there.
We can pray about that
We'll
later,
pray about
Manny.
that afterwards.
Oh yeah. But that's like what's what my son wears every Sunday. So part of me, I still hear my dad's voice within me.
Yes.
Like, man, I'm really gonna take you to church like this.
Yeah, totally.
What's going on?
And as I imagine, obviously these are in so many ways personal experiences. Banning and I all know because of deep friendships and walking with other people. But the tension that I know from so many of my friends, whether they're Hispanic or they've grown up in Asian communities and they're the second generation, and what becomes so challenging for church is that their parents who establish are just so longing for their kids to maintain part of their cultural identity that they are terrified they're losing and becoming too American, and yet growing up second, third generation, they are, they're living in these in-between worlds and trying to find their own identity. And I've watched how many people that jump from a first generation church to trying to express themselves as actually growing up in America, feeling more American,
for sure,
identifying more American, and then the tension.
Well, at some level, having to reach Americans,
right?
Exactly.
Because it's not just that they want to worship Jesus differently on the parent side. I imagine it feels like such a loss of cultural identity.
I think that's a big issue there. I grew up in a house where my dad didn't allow us to speak English.
Yeah,
he'd be like, "Hey, you got to speak Spanish." And obviously now, at this age of life, I'm like, "Hey, Dad, thanks." That I could speak Spanish fluently and write and read, and it allows me to reach. I could say my people. I have access to that. But it was like, hey, you're speaking Spanish in the house. Make sure you're speaking Spanish. Make sure you're speaking Spanish. And even to this day, when we transitioned into Planting Hope, it was actually weird worshiping in English.
Wow,
it was weird. Like to pray, to read the Bible in English it was awkward.
Yes.
I didn't even own an English Bible because all we did church was Spanish.
Yes.
So I'm planning this English-speaking church, and all I have is a Spanish Bible. All I know are like most of the songs that I grew up worshiping with. They're all Spanish. So we had to it kind of felt like we were relearning everything. How do you pray in English?
That's amazing.
Even some of the scriptures that you memorized as a child.
Yes.
I'm like, dude, I don't even know them. I don't even know them in English. Like, what is this scripture? It was really like a relearning process for me, my wife, and kind of just navigating through that because, my dad always joked and he always said, listen, you guys got to speak Spanish because in heaven, that's the language you're going to be speaking.
Well, I've actually heard this with English too. I've heard some guys, they say it's just not really as an intimate of a language. Well, you may have been the one who was telling me that actually.
Yeah.
That like when you really want to get just intimate with the Lord in your prayer, you got to go Spanish because English does not do it.
Yeah. So Oz, you'll appreciate this. As a kid, right? So I grew up in small town Idaho, which just comes with its own, complications and naivety. But as a kid, you learn how to, write in your letters, and then you eventually learn how to write in cursive. I used to hear people speak something I didn't understand, and I was convinced that what they were doing is they were speaking in cursive.
In cursive.
And that I would one day, just like I was being taught to write in cursive, they were speaking Spanish.
Yeah.
I literally thought Spanish
was cursive.
was speaking in cursive, and I was just so excited
I
for the
would have
day.
loved to have been there the moment when you realized that was wrong.
Yeah.
Tell me about how did you navigate, maybe you didn't.
Yeah.
But how did you navigate feeling like you were being dishonoring as you kind of led a different way and headed a different direction?
So a lot of the tension came more like with the exterior appearance, like the way I dress, the way I look, even maybe the way that we do church. So that was a bit, that was tough. But I'm telling you, the first day I went up with jeans, it's like you're feeling like, man, like you're really letting go a piece of yourself. Not wearing the tie, or like you say, going up there with a hat. It's intimidating. Like, man, like how am I really gonna do this? And part of it was even a struggle. Like, is God pleased? Like, is this gonna make God happy, or am I displeasing God? So there was a lot of tension with that, but a lot of it had to do with like just the way I looked rather than my heart.
That's fascinating.
So, a lot of the tensions that we had was that just how we looked and kind of playing this role or having this mask up of, hey, we have this perfect little life and this is what it looks like. And so a lot of the tensions was that. It was just on the outside, whether if I'm going to wear sneakers or I'm going to wear dress shoes. But even there's so much beauty from the first generation. Like a lot of things that I learned from my father and my mother were that, like, how to seek God's presence.
Yes.
How to pray. So there's, part of the prayer lifestyle, the reading the word, that side of me felt like I was honoring dad and I was honoring mom. It's like the idea of there's nothing like a Hispanic praying mother.
Yes.
There's nothing like a dad who comes in, he's like, son, get your life right. And like Jesus is coming. And so that spiritual side,
I love that.
Man, I am so grateful that my dad, that my mom taught me how to pray. And it wasn't like casual prayers. Like, it wasn't like, hey, God. No, it was like, we're going after it.
So you had to learn how to actually separate some things.
Yeah.
And go like, hey, this, like what I wear is different than. And those things were a little bit more combined growing up. And just as you got older, you were able to, that's amazing.
But that's a big struggle.
Yeah, I know. I can imagine. Carlos, I'm sure that some of this stuff will come up. We're going to have Carlos come on in just a minute. Carlos Whitaker, who's the guest for us. And we might talk about this. But I'm actually fascinated because, I mean, you, with all that's happened the last couple of years, you're pastoring some white people.
Yeah.
And not just some white people, some older white people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming some older, wealthier white people who probably vote Republican, I imagine. That's probably a whole nother podcast, but that I would be fascinated to kind of hear what it's like in the midst of all that happened to be pastoring people. And I'm sure there's a diversity in Napa, I imagine, from everything from the workers that are there to the people that are owning the whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously Napa is you got a lot of whites and you have a lot of browns. I mean, there's a lot of Mexicans there. I mean, if you meet a Salvadoran, you're like, oh wow, there's a Salvadorian here. So a lot of Mexicans within the Napa community. But one of our campuses, which we have a campus in Sonoma, second campus there. I am the only person of color at this campus, and I've actually fallen in love with the people. And surprisingly, they've fallen in love with me. So it's been beautiful to try to navigate that and kind of be different. And again, I think a lot of like, coming out of the traditional Hispanic church prepared me a lot for being okay with being with myself at some point. Yeah. Because we struggled with like how I'm going to look, how I speak, the things in our life, and now leading a church that looks nothing like me. I think it's helped me feel comfortable in my own skin and saying, hey, God, I can still honor you and be myself.
That's amazing.
Come on. I'm so ready for this conversation.
And these are the conversations we need to have because at the end of the day, the cultural tensions that just exist in our country don't have to be the places we fracture. I often think they're the places we fracture because we feel like we don't know how to find those points of unity.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually, Oz, one of the things I love you saying, even in your own story, it just is like you found the points of unity and you made those the point.
Yeah. I love it.
And then you just let that lead forward and the fruit and the life that comes with it. And so I just think these things, if we can just step into them with the right heart, I think people would be amazed how much is solvable.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'm excited today. We get to have on as a guest Carlos Whitaker. Carlos is a really dear friend, somebody that I love, trust, has really just had an influence on my life, and just one of those guys too. You just can go and have a meal with, and just an incredible guy, and is one of the main voices right now, I think, out there in some of this space. So I'm excited to kind of welcome on Carlos Whitaker with us. Well, Carlos, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for jumping on. I mean this. I'm going to have you introduce who you are, but one of the things I love about what we get to do is actually just run with friends, like people that I genuinely care about, people that I genuinely just want to go sit down and catch up and have a coffee together, have a meal together. And Carlos, I just appreciate you jumping on. You've got a lot going on in your life. We're not going to get into all that's happening with you right now, but can you give a little bit of a context for people that maybe don't know who you are, maybe aren't an Instagram fan? Are we allowed to? Do you have Instagram fans or just followers?
I don't know. No, I call them the Insta Familia.
Insta Familia. That's family in Spanish, Oz.
Thanks, Banny. I appreciate you.
Just to let you know, that's family in Spanish. Can you kind of give some context of who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm a friend of yours. And I'm a new friend of Phil and Oz's, so I am jumping on that. But yeah, gosh, when somebody asks me what I do, I always have a hard time trying to figure out what that is. I think in the perspective where people maybe can understand a line of a job, I write books and then I talk about them. But you know, that's such a small part, you know, like the bookends of really my day-to-day life. You know, I share a lot of what I do on social media. I try to have, especially the last 2 years, to have grace-filled conversations about difficult subjects, helping people maybe navigate some and give them words that maybe they didn't know they needed. You know, I'm not I'll tell you what I'm not when it comes to some of these issues that I've been helping people walk through. I'm not an expert. I think I don't know, it could like a professional friend, like just like a social media friend, like, oh my gosh, like that guy, I know I don't know him, but he's kind of like my friend, you know? And so I do that every day. You know, I travel, I speak. I've, you know, had the privilege of speaking at Jesus Culture, and you know, in some respects, the majority of my career I've spoken in faith spaces, and I'd say the last 18 months that has shifted dramatically to where I'm probably 80% in the corporate space, secular space now, and 20% in the faith space. But I mean, I'm still, you know, for everybody that's worried about me, that I'll get DMs like, you know, hey Carlos, like you're leaving the church. You know, I still love Jesus. I still follow Jesus. I still believe in the blood of the cross and the power of the resurrection. Everybody can relax. But I get to talk to people that don't believe that a lot more. Yeah. And it's a lot of fun. So you know, that's what I do.
Carlos, maybe share this real quick. I actually want to hear, because we're going to have this conversation, but with you in particular, I know having a conversation, the past couple of years has been interesting because the relationships you had, the spaces that you were in, I do think, and I'd say maybe on both sides, there's a massive overreaction on some of this stuff. It's so hard to have the conversations around social issues, justice. Can we look at the prison system? Can we talk about race? Like, even having these conversations, there's an immediate blowback. It's fascinating to me about like, wow, like I just want to have a conversation about this, and like I think this, like, I'm not fully sure, so let's talk about this. And if we can't talk about this here, then you have to go talk about it in the world. So here's my point. Here's my question. You've experienced a little bit of that. Was that surprising to you, or how did you navigate that, I guess, is what I would ask? Because I know there's a lot of people who are like, dude, you've completely gone left. You hate Jesus. Yeah, whatever else is going on. You know, people that you walked with for a while because of some of the conversations, and even ones that maybe would disagree with your take on things. Even ones that are like, I don't fully agree with where you've landed, but still that blowback. Was that surprising to you, and how did you navigate it?
Yeah, you know, it was very surprising to me. You know, I guess somewhat surprising to me. I up until 2020, you know, I kind of help people navigate things about their faith, and, you know, breaking agreements with, you know, very, very, very specific faith-based things. And I was kind of like the happy-go-lucky family guy that videoed birds in his backyard. And so there was an expectation with my platform to receive what they'd been getting. And then suddenly, to be fair to them, suddenly, like in March of 2020, right when the Ahmaud Arbery thing happened, decided to upload my very first video talking about a cultural issue, talking about something that was a little bit more targeted towards culture. And Banning, I mean, you were there for it. Like, you saw kind of what happened. Like, I went from 35,000 Instagram followers in one night to 17,000 Instagram followers in about, 48 hours. And I thought, I've ruined my career. Like, that's it. Like, I can't believe it. And the blowback that I got, from Christians who I've spoken on their stages, preached at their churches, the stuff that I was reading in my DMs, and how could you, and how, you know, you Marxist, left wing, because so yes, I was shocked. I was I thought I'd ruined everything. But also, to be fair, we were ripe. It was ripe for the blowback. The culture was where we were, you know, just stepping into this pandemic. And so I just stayed where I felt like the Lord had me, like, just continue to speak to these things gracefully, with your perspective as a half Black, half Latino man. Yeah. And, you know, Banning, I think that after I got over my feelings being hurt, which took about a year,
Yeah.
And it took a lot of pastoring from you, from my pastors, Alex and Henry, from a lot of people. I think I came to this space of beginning to see those that I got the blowback from differently, not seeing them as the enemy, right? But seeing them as people that I had shepherded. And, as much as you can shepherd somebody on social media, a lot of these people had been following me for 7-8 years, and they were just shocked. And so I had to begin to learn to walk those spaces in a different way. In no way, shape, or form pastoring as you guys pastor, because there's a level of I think there's a level of accountability that you have that I don't have. Maybe you can correct me on that, but I'm not pastoring a church. These people aren't in a church.
Yeah.
They just follow me on their phone, right? Yeah. But I was surprised at the blowback for sure.
I think what's so interesting, Carlos, because what you're describing, like on a pretty macro social level, is what in many ways all of us experienced on various levels. And for me, even
absolutely.
I mean, I think this was the profound pain of 2020 personally, right? There's all the stuff that was happening in our culture, but when we're talking about what happened personally, was that no matter what I did or said, it was instantly frozen and brought into an extreme perspective. And this place of where my responses probably from yours would have been a little bit more moderate in terms of if we're talking about political leanings.
Sure.
But still, even in that, when I would speak, I would say one thing, and then instantly I would be categorized as the most extreme version. I mean, I still remember this moment where on the same day in my church, 2 meetings back to back, somebody sat with me and said, "Hey, I'm leaving the church. You've abandoned the gospel. You've given over to cultural issues. You no longer stand on the truths of Scripture. You've just fully caved into culture," right? The very next meeting was, "Hey, I'm leaving the church. You are part of the problem of white supremacy in the world. You are not willing to walk far enough into the pain. You don't see your own problem." And I'm like, my mind, I was hurting, but in my mind, I was also like,
said, "Can I get you two together?"
That's exactly what I thought. Like, I'd love to have the two. Like, but my mind was like, you're both hearing me. But this is what I've learned, that neither of them actually had been listening to me for quite a while. But these things, but that is, because no matter where you were, no matter whether you were kind of, because political spectrums aren't even always the perfect paradigm, but whether you handled things on what felt more right, what felt more left, it did not matter. Everything suddenly froze, and you were discarded as the other enemy. And it was really difficult.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating, too, because even what Carlos is saying and what you're saying, at the end of the day, we're just trying to help people.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just trying to help people in their walk with God and make a difference in the world. And I don't have another agenda. Yeah. So it was fascinating. Yeah. I guess as we talk about this, and Oz, I don't know, I imagine for me, it's true. You know what happened is we lost both extremes.
Right.
Like both left and right extremes. They don't go to our church anymore, I don't think.
And by the way, we lost both extremes on both of our perspectives, not because we didn't kind of try to move into those spaces, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you lose both extremes when you don't speak about things. They just kind of, I gave that was part of what made it so hard. I did everything I could to try to lead and pastor my church through this, both in the love of Jesus, both in what I believed from Scripture, both trying to honor all voices, and it was wild.
I think for me, it's not just, how do we navigate this with our church, but as a Hispanic man, as a Mexican man, like not just the conversations from the pulpit, but even with my kids.
Yeah.
So at the same time, you have a church who wants to hear from you, but you also have kids who are mourning and shocked and not knowing what's happening and what's going on. At the time, my son, I think he was like, going back, Carlos, to the story you were sharing, I think my son was like 11. Oh no, he was about 9 years old, and being, he's a little darker than me. So even navigating some of that stuff at home. So, I think some of the tension for me was, it's not being so quick to what I'm going to say to the church, but, how am I going to sit with my kids and feel this and
That's good,
cry about this and really love on them in that area while having a church that's like, hey, pastor, what are you going to say? So that was a lot of the
Well, that's also having a church that doesn't all look like you.
Correct. Yeah. So that was a bit different, having this conversation.
Carlos, let me maybe ask you this, because I think that for pastors, and this is why I want to do the podcast. Like, I want to do the podcast because we want to have these conversations. We want to have meaningful conversations around, this is what we came out of. I find a lot of pastors, maybe I just speak for myself, I want to engage these issues. It is so, you just aren't quite sure what to do sometimes. How much do I do with this? It's exhausting. And then you kind of feel bad saying it's exhausting, because I'm walking with people of color who are like, you're exhausted. This is what we deal with all the time. You know what I'm saying? So I'm saying that that's a real thing. So you're like, dude, I'm just exhausted. Every time we're talking about this stuff, I've got to go navigate all this stuff. Real people left that it was just kind of hurtful and painful, and the misunderstanding. I guess I do mind some of that stuff. I'm like, I'm just trying to have a conversation with our church about how we should be able to talk about whether or not, I come from a police family. I come from a my dad, multiple family members. I guess, Carlos, how would you talk to pastors about pastoring people that think radically differently than them, but pastoring people as well in the midst of what Phil's talking about? As a pastor, you're just dealing with this type of stuff. You've had to navigate it. I understand your world's more social media, but you are in the church too. You're in the church.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one of the things I love about you. You're pro-church, pro-Bible, but you're in the church, on social media. What's kind of advice or what you've learned in the process of all this, of how to continue to move towards people and not kind of just...
Yeah. No, that's good, Banning. I was uninvited from a lot of churches. Like I was suddenly the speaking requests went cold, and suddenly the corporate requests went hot. And I remember that was something I had to navigate. Like there was like just wounding. I was like, wait a second. Like, now that I'm talking about issues that, that I feel like really matter now, maybe this is just a little too hot for us right now. And, as I navigated that, I realized something. I think pastors can, this may sound fluffy. Okay. So I'm going to say it, and pastors are going to roll their eyes, but go past it and hang on for just a second. Something that I learned, a friend of mine said is, they said, Carlos, when people ask me, because people started asking me all the time, Carlos, like, what's your stance? Like, you're a public figure. What's your stance on this issue? What's your stance on this issue? What's your stance on this issue? And again, I have some capabilities to answer this, I think, a little differently than a pastor of a local church. But I would say this constantly. I would say, well, I don't stand on issues. I walk with people. I don't stand on issues. I walk with people. And they're like, oh, it's a cop out. Like, and I was like, well, if I stand on this, if I make and there's certain things that we're going to have to stand on, but most of the time people just wanted me to say something so they can make a decision whether to stick around or to leave.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, though, I'm like, so you love everything else that I say. You appreciate everything else that I am. You're here on a daily basis to be infused with hope, but you're waiting for me to take a stand on something so that you can make a decision whether or not you're going to continue or go. And that's just, for me, that's bullcrap. Like that's, and so I began to say, if you want to know what my stance on an issue is, then DM me, and then and so this is what would happen every single time, right? They would DM me, and I would send them a video, especially somebody that's really wanting to know. And when I would send them a video back, my face on their phone would suddenly diffuse 99% of the sparked rage-filled emotions, and suddenly it was just Carlos telling them that he's not standing on an issue, but he's walking with people. So as pastors, I would say, take that for what it's worth in whatever context you're in. And, and I think that's what pastors try to do every day, right? Is to walk with the people, because these aren't issues. These are actually humans that are being affected by these issues. So I turn the issue into a person. I think that's one thing that was really helpful. And then I would just speak to pastors and I would say, understand this, and you do, that you are suddenly pastoring like open wounds, like no longer scabs. And so I feel like we were scabbed as a nation for a long time. And, you hit a scab and you bump up against it, and it hurts, but there's protection there. But what 2020 did is it ripped the scab off of all these wounds. And suddenly you blow on a scab, on an open wound, you just blow on it. People are like, they're just a lot more reactionary than they would be if there was a scab there. But now everybody's walking around with open scabs with their wounds. Like, you barely even touch it and it is painful. And so you just have to be a lot more tender. You have to be a lot slower to speak. And I think it's okay. It's so hard to say it, but I think it's okay to be like, and you said this at the beginning, you know what? I don't know. I say that so much more now. Like, when people ask me my thoughts on something, I'm like, actually, I don't know. Yeah. And where has that answer gone? Like, I don't know. And when has that been an inappropriate answer to give?
Well, I'll tell you where, in the political realm. Yeah. And this is the concern right now, is what you're describing about slow to speak, quick to listen, understanding. Even right now, Oz sharing about, I mean, this is your experience of having to walk with your kids. I'm not having to walk with my kids like that. My kids aren't coming to me confused about what they just saw on the news and wondering what's going. You know what I mean? Like, you're what you're describing, what you're sharing, is something that's completely different than what I've had to walk out. But that political thing is a thing that the political thing is absolutely sure.
Yep.
The political thing absolutely knows the answer.
Yeah.
The political thing,
and it demonizes the other.
Yes. Yeah. The political thing is not quiet and listening. It's not that at all. And that's, we mentioned a little bit, we've talked about this, and I was actually thinking, Carlos, I was going to lead out by saying, Carlos, me and you don't agree on everything, but I know we probably don't, but I couldn't think of anything. So I'm sure we don't. I'm sure we don't in some way. You probably.
But listen. We may not agree, and Phil, go in a second, but we may not agree on anything. But listen, 2020, like I needed the banning I got in 2020, because in 2020, banning was like, I mean, I just remember I was walking down a street in some podunk town, Pennsylvania, and Banning calls me, FaceTimes me, and he's like, "Hey, that post that you just put up, do you really want that to be on the internet?" And I was like, I'd like take that down, right? It's like, that's where
we don't. I don't think we really disagree. I'm like, I'm like, maybe. I was actually thinking, I'm sure we do somewhere, but I actually couldn't think of anything. But this is one of the things I was thinking about, because we've talked about gray areas. Yeah. So, Carlos, you're talking about it, and I think this is one of those things that is maybe so hard to navigate, is that there are a lot of gray areas. There are a lot of, whatever, even talking through the role of government when it comes to the poor, or all whatever, just having the conversation of how should society be made up, what's the role of all this type of stuff. But then there's not gray areas,
right? Well, and then that for me becomes what's so difficult about trying to lead through this, is because I actually think the body of Christ is incredibly confused about what are the gray areas and what are not the gray areas. And because we aren't in agreement there, we can't actually safely head into these. And one of the things, so let me kind of, Carlos, I want to ask you something, but I need to probably frame it first. Is
he has to qualify it first. That's what he's saying. It's not framing, it's qualifying.
No, it's just
I really love you, Carlos.
This friendship.
We're brothers in Christ.
No, we are.
Here you go.
Having said that,
I'm in Atlanta a lot more than I am in Sacramento.
Did you know this? This is an intervention, Carlos. Yes. No, it's. I actually just really so value what you've done and who you are, and I think the challenge is, so I think a lot of pastors listening to this, I think at the end of the day, they feel the tension because they do want to step in to places of racial pain. They do want to step into places of historic wounds. And there's going to be people on both extremes. There's going to be people on a political right that say, hey, even the idea that you are saying that any of these things exist is caving to whatever, or people that are like, if you are not immediately willing to come extremely over to this perspective, then you're completely brainwashed by the right. Right? There's those, but I find that most pastors, this is what most pastors are feeling. They want to be able to step in. They want to be able to love. They want to be slow. But there's also part of the sin. This is what I wanted to ask you. Part of the challenge is that there's also these deep convictions that are not naive in certain. They're not thought through convictions around that actually don't have to do with some of the issues around race implicitly. Issues like where I stand on historic Christian sexual ethic, where I stand on who I am in terms of my convictions around life and pro-life and what I believe about those things. And I'm all for really thoughtful, nuanced conversations that are just around those issues. But those are places, of the authority of Scripture. And the hard part is, this is what I wanted to ask you, is that as a pastor who says, listen, and people, if you know me, then people would go, hey, I at least can say, Phil has dove into the end of those issues and come back. His convictions on them, whether people would agree or not, they're not thoughtless. I've gone to the end and come back.
Good. Yep.
And I hold to these three things. And what's hard is that somebody in my position, which I think is a lot of pastors, it's almost like to try to enter into the conversations at some kind of public level, because I'm basically coming to a point saying, these are not places that I'm okay dismissing. I'm not okay letting go of. And ultimately, in a political world, it puts me into a right spectrum.
They're non-negotiables.
Yeah.
And then, as I want to enter into these conversations, it's almost like people, the leaders, the voices, the pastors that are engaging in these issues, ultimately because it creates an atmosphere that if I'm not willing to turn ultimately politically left, now people don't say this, but ultimately if I'm not willing to turn politically left, I don't really get it and I don't really care. And whether that is said or not, I guarantee that is how so many pastors feel, is basically saying, you're telling me that the only way I can actually care, the only way I can actually show my support, the only way I can actually make a difference is that I have to make a political move which would re-identify how I feel about these three things in a way that then puts me into a different space. And even though I want to, in this place, enter into this different space, right or wrong, those are not things that I can let go of. And I find that then they get really, really, really marginalized in the place of saying then you have nothing to say or nothing to offer. And so that's a long context. My question that I want to put in front of you is, as somebody that I think sees that and somebody that I think understands it, because you walk in these spaces, what would you actually hold? How would you encourage pastors that are just saying, hey, I am just trying to be faithful, and I feel like people are saying I can't actually, that I'm not being faithful, or that I can't be faithful, or I can't help because I'm not willing to go into political spaces others are willing, and then I'm immediately discounted for it. How would you encourage pastors like that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would encourage them to listen to even how you framed and set up that question, because even the way you framed and set it up, gave me such empathy for who you are and for how you've taken and thought through all of these things backwards and forwards. You're not just flippantly doing it, so encouraging pastors to, a lot of my left-leaning followers say things like this to me all the time. Carlos, you're the last pastor I follow. Carlos, you're the last Christian that I follow. I've unfollowed all of them because they're all right. Suddenly lumping every pastor into one. And so I feel like I'm the last line of defense for pastors that, I go to the Belonging here in Nashville, Tennessee, and my pastors are, I think they've navigated this stuff so well, but those few things you're talking about, they are blatantly from the pulpit, we believe in life. We believe in these. And so I have a lot of people that follow me that know I go to the Belonging. How could you go to the Belonging? They're pro-life. They're a bunch of, this and that. And so again, I'm one step removed from leading a church, right? I just attend. I'm a high capacity volunteer, but I have to have these conversations.
You run a video camera. Don't downplay that.
I run camera 3.
Don't downplay
camera 3.
Don't downplay running camera 3. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I run camera 3. And so, to encourage pastors to do the work, if you've done the work and you've gone to the end and you've spoken with, and not only spoken with, but lived with people that are on the other side of whatever this issue is that you are going to, without going into extremes. I just finished, or without letting everyone know completely what I did, I just finished spending 17 days in a community with people that honestly vehemently disagree with a lot of things that I believe in. But I spent 17 days like learning from them and loving them and being with them. And so, you know what that did for me? Like it built empathy inside of me. Yeah. It built empathy for me when it came to a lot of these hot topic issues that I'm like, wow, like this actually affects you a lot differently than it affects me. And I'll give a quick example. And again, I don't think I can land this plane as cleanly as maybe a pastor listening to the podcast wants me to land it. But quite simply, when it was like, let's see, Breonna Taylor. Okay, so it was like no knock warrants. I was at the marches. I had my get rid of old no knock warrant, banner, and I'm marching, Black Lives Matter, all the things. And because I was like, no, like this can't happen. I'm passionate. I'm going. But then I got a text message from a friend of mine, a really close friend of mine, who is a SWAT team member in LAPD SWAT team member. And we started to have this conversation. He's like, hey, man, like, you love me, right? And I was like, yeah, no, I love you. He's like, you love Lori, my wife? I was like, yeah, I love Lori.
He went there. You love my kids?
Yeah, you love my kids? Yeah, he did. And I was like, yeah, and we're talking. He's like, okay. He's like, now, when I serve a no-knock warrant, normally it's like 2 a.m. and there's real bad guys on the other side of the door. If I were to knock on the door, and remember, we're talking about me. We're not talking about the police. We're talking about me, Matt. When I knock on the door, if I were to knock on that door, there would be about 5 rounds of shotgun shells that would come straight through the door into my chest, and I would cease to exist. Do you want that? And I was like, no, actually, I don't. He's like, okay, so this is what I want you to do. I want you to think about, and Phil, I think this is what you were saying, and this is where I want to sit in, is going to the ends of the issue, like really putting skin on the issue. So this is what we decided to do. I said, I'm going to come to LA and I'm going to go on a police ride along with you on your little midnight shift. But then what I want you to do, Matt, is I want you to come with me to a Black Lives Matter protest. And I want you to walk with me. And so what ended up happening is 2 people on honestly opposing sides of issues, like switch places for a second. It was like wife swap, but not. It was like, life swap, right? Yeah. And I suddenly had a change of heart on the no-knock warrant issue. And to be honest, he had a change of heart because he got to have a conversation with people that were just, that he wasn't around on a daily basis, that were really wounded by a lot of things that they've had interactions with police. And what I think happened is my followers saw that I did this. And a lot of my followers saw that I was like strong, like, no, get rid of no-knock warrants, all these things. But then they saw that I went and had this experience with Matt. And I changed my view, and I did lose some of my followers when I said, hey, listen, actually, I don't think we need to get rid of no-knock warrants, because like I now am putting a face and a family to a situation that I was vehemently against without going to the ends of it. And so for pastors, I think, it's not like everybody can take 17 days and move in with a culture that doesn't look like you, think like you, and vote like you, but you can do enough to where that's where the exhaustive work is going to come in. Really putting skin on these issues, letting people know that you're putting skin on these issues, and still landing where you land on pro-life and on, sexuality and all of these things. Hey, listen, if you're going to the ends of if you are walking with trans, people, if you are really in there with them, doing your best to understand them, and you still land in a place, the extreme people are going to fall away. But I think you've done your due diligence, and I think that's the only way to get the respect of people that I think are ready to bite.
It is amazing to me how people will completely forget the concept of social media, unfollow you, if you don't agree with them completely.
Yeah,
completely.
Like, this is where it is. If you don't agree with me completely on every single issue,
we're done.
Fascinating to me. Tell me, Oz, a little bit. I'm interested because as Phil's sharing his experience, well, let me just back up real quick with Carlos. This is
really valuable.
Hands down.
It's good.
You got to go walk with. You got to go walk with.
I just wish we had an ability, as people are listening to this podcast, to feel their heart rate go up, though, because I guarantee right now that's happening for people. Yeah. Even going, hey, Black Lives Matter rally and walking with trans people, and I mean this is this is the real stuff that is deeply felt.
This is why I think there's a lot of good with social media, but I'm full on. You got to put social media down, and you got to go walk with people.
Yeah.
You have to actually go walk with people. And I think that we've lost that somehow. We just don't walk with people, and we've allowed the political thing to say everybody's the enemy.
Yeah, if I could, one of the things that you're talking about, Carlos, for me, it sounds like it's not just what we're going to say, but being present, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's stepping in with people. I think because sometimes as pastors, we get caught up on what we're going to say, but sometimes it just requires being there with people and walking through it. So, what you're talking about is very powerful, man.
Yeah.
How do we just do life with people and navigate through these things, kind of see life through
and
their
how about
lens?
pastoring people to stop listening to political podcasts on a daily basis? Like just doing that in and of itself, like will get rid of so much hate. I mean, they're on a daily basis, they're just filling themselves with hate. And it's like, I don't care what side you're listening to listen to that stuff every single day. I've just spent 5 weeks without my phone. I don't know what's happening in the world. I don't know if there's a new virus happening somewhere. I don't know who is mad at who. And I am as joyful and present as I've ever been. Now, ever. Like,
no, I remember,
I'm not mad every day.
Carlos, I remember actually this realization I had in 20. I remember calling Banning and saying like, hey, I see it. I see how few people in my church, I am actually their pastor. CNN, Fox News are actually their pastors.
No, the podcast host
Ben
is their
Shapiro,
pastor. Yeah.
Don Lemon are actually their pastors, and they only tolerate me if I get in alignment with them. And we have to be talking about this because I agree that the idea that we don't exist in that space in the world, and we don't speak to that space in the world is not a reality. It's probably not even helpful. But we also have to be talking about the way we have given it space is not only out of alignment with the teachings of Jesus, but it actually, I believe, has deep demonic strongholds that keep people in bondage. Because what's crazy is, right, if you say the one wrong thing, people will suddenly form you as an enemy, but not on the things that actually matter. It's amazing to me the places where we will force people to have to agree with us, and then the places we won't. And usually it's completely out of balance.
I want to ask Carlos another question, but Oz, I'm interested to hear from you because around this thing, Phil's describing the experience that he's having of having to he wants to step into these spaces, but then there's like these kind of non-negotiables over here. As a Hispanic pastor leading not just a Hispanic church and all that type of stuff, as this stuff comes for you, is it similar? I'm assuming it's not similar in things, but I'm saying, what is it that you're navigating with?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of conversations, as we have, whites in our church and browns in our church. There's obviously, we got different people reacting a different way and trying to navigate through that thing. But, a lot of it, going back to even what Carlos said, a lot of it I've been learning to respond very slowly. Yeah. And being okay with that. I think giving our church even an opportunity and time to grieve through some of the pain, through some of the fears. I'm reminded of the story of Nehemiah, when he hears what's going on with his people, what's happening with his city. The first thing he does is he sits. And he just begins to cry, and begins to weep, and he begins to fast, and he begins to pray before he even does anything. So for us has really been, because we're diverse, is really, how do we sit together and cry, and then how do we have these conversations, with our church and with the hopes of moving forward. And really, like you said, Phil, focusing on the things that actually unite us rather than the things that divide us. And I think that's been our key for our church. One of the things that unite us, as far as, as Carlos says, right, we believe in the blood of Christ and, all those things. And, so us navigating through this has looked different with every single person in our church because, even as I sit with you guys and getting to know Banning, life looks different from the other side. So really, I don't have all the answers, but if we can sit together, if we can do life together, then I think we can get to a place where we understand that we have love for each other, and how could we get this through? So it's a lot of walking with people through this journey, and really it's been actually saying less for me. It's been saying less and just getting to hear people's hearts, and really coming to a place like, man, I see you and I hear you, how do we now navigate with this? How do we move forward? So
I think in order to do that too, in the years to come, there's going to have to be a lot of grace, because I realize a lot of grace. I realize that because
2024 is coming.
Yeah. Well,
even a lot of pastors need grace, man.
yeah,
during
but
this
I
time.
even find a lot of people, you just have to go like, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of virus and unrest and all this stuff that's happening, and uncertainty about economy. Like, just flat out, people are not at their best.
Yeah.
It's just real. And to act like I never get in a fight with my wife because I was stressed and because I was overwhelmed, and so I responded wrong. At some level, people that blew out of our churches, people that threw whatever, and we are like, no, there's going to have to be a lot of grace, because I think a lot of those, I think people, when they actually get out of some of the stress and the pressure, they're able to get a little more clear head and go, oh, I didn't respond to that right. And the grace that's going to be needed, I think, from people to be able to go like, oh man, come on. So let me ask this real quick, Carlos. I think that not everybody, I would imagine even people that don't have a big social media following. I'm going to call you a social media influencer. You haven't said that yet, but I'm going to put you in the same category as the teenage TikTok star.
Awesome.
He has a familia.
Yeah, he has.
That's
I got a familia.
Listen, you're in the same category as
I have
the
merch, bro.
As
I have
the
merch.
That's right. As the TikTok star, YouTube, whatever. That's who you are, Carlos. I think that one of the big issues, and this is crazy, but this is a big stress for pastors, is what to say on social media, when to say it, how often to say it. Now, I have some opinions, because social media in general drives me crazy with this. It drives me crazy when everybody posts pray for Ukraine, because I'm like, I don't think you're actually praying for Ukraine. Like, I'm not trying to be like that guy, right? I just think it's super easy to throw
Feels like virtue signal.
Yeah, it's super easy to throw a thing that says pray for a country, and I'm like, I'm not actually sure you're on your knees before the Lord praying for Ukraine and all that those people are going through in this moment, and standing against a war that's coming. I don't think you're doing that. This is going to be the cynical side of me. I'm like, it's super easy to throw that stuff up.
For sure.
And so some of that I don't like, because I'm like, it doesn't feel real to me. It doesn't feel actually authentic. Some of it may be. I'm not trying to say it's not. So you've got that. So sometimes I resist, just every time something happens, you got to throw something up because everybody else is, and then they're going to think that you don't care. So there's that thing of like, I don't know, I'm just doing it because I feel pressure, because I think that people in our church are going to think I don't care about black people if I don't post real quick about this. Yep. And then the other thing is with social media, I'm like, dude, it's just not my first response. Social media is not the first thing I go to in these moments. There's also, and then just navigating for me, there's people all around the world. They're not just people in America that are on this thing. Yeah. So now so here's my really long question, Carlos. I don't know. Do you guys deal with that about do I post? Do I not post? How much do I post? I just posted yesterday, and now there's another shooting, and now there's a hurricane in Tennessee, and now there's a famine in India, and there's this, and if I don't post, I think everybody's going to think I don't care. But then if I do post, it's just because I feel pressure.
Yeah. Well, I think
not necessarily because.
I think that's my problem. I feel more pressured than anything, because I just want my social media so you can see what I'm eating.
Yeah, totally. People.
I just did Tough Mudder on Saturday.
I loved you. We should have talked about that. That was my favorite video.
So for me, it's like
he feel almost walking through the electrical. It was amazing.
I remember at night I was laying down and I just started.
I was actually thinking you should have sprinted through it, but keep going.
Yeah. So for me, it's like I just want to post stuff like that. Like I want to post stuff of my son, playing baseball, my daughter doing lacrosse.
So
there is pressure.
The whole world is going like, no, that's not what your social media should be for.
That's not what you should use it for.
Your social media should not be for that.
Correct.
And I want to go like, oh, you don't get to define what my social media is for me.
Yeah.
But
so there's some real pressure there.
So this is your world. If you say, I don't know, that, like I'm not an expert, this is the area that you're an expert in.
He has merch.
You have merch, my friend.
Merch.
Is there advice that you would give in the social media world? Because this really is, Carlos, I'm not just trying to, there is anxiety.
Yeah.
Especially because so many people have left, or so many people have like, you're this or you're that. And so you're just kind of, and here's the honest truth. Here's the crazy thing. And Carlos, I asked you and then I interrupted you without you even talking. But welcome to our friendship.
Yes, absolutely.
Totally. I would also say this. There are people that I care deeply about in our church that are people of color. I'm talking about that, walking with them, even hearing Oz talk about his kids and like hearing these stories. I'm like, oh, and I really do care about these. I'm not just talking about people who go to church. I'm talking about people that I know in our church, people of color that I'm walking with. And I also know how much a social media post matters. Like that's the other thing. Like how much when I post something, they do feel seen. They do feel known. They do feel cared for. So then there's that tension too, because I'm like, but then I'm like, I don't even know if the algorithm. I don't even know if the algorithm. If you'll even see it.
If you'll even see it.
If you'll even see it. Go ahead, Carlos. Can you kind of help pastors navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, no, but yes. Just know that you're again, you're not going to make anybody happy when it comes to your posting and your decision making. I mean, I feel like I speak to almost every big issue that happens in the world or America, and there's things I don't care about. To be honest with you, there's things I'm just like, there's a war in Ukraine happening, but do you know that there's something happening in the Congo that nobody knows about? And there's just as many people that are, it's like, it's impossible to cover. I'm not a news source. Like, and I have to keep telling people all the time is I'm not going to cover everything like a news reporter. Like, that's not what I do. Like, I get to speak to things that I am passionate about, that God has placed on my heart. And I use stories very strategically. Like there's things that I will post on my feed that live there forever. And I think that pastors need to think, okay, what am I going to post on my feed that's going to live there forever? And what am I going to post on my stories that gets to disappear in 24 hours? and I do that. And so guess what? I'll talk about some things and know that that's going to disappear in 24 hours. And I'll care about it. I'll share about it. But it goes away. And then people that come back to me and they're like, hey, you never posted on this. Do you not care? And I was like, oh no, I did. You just didn't see it because you weren't on the algorithm thing, didn't push my story into your feed. And so I definitely use posts on your feed and stories completely differently, right? I'm using stories for things I know are going to disappear. And I'm posting things on my feed that I know I want to stay and become a part of my brand, right? Of the brand of who I am. Like we all have brands now because of social media. And so I know it's difficult, it's not a perfect science, but I definitely use stories for things that I maybe don't want to live on my feed for a long time.
Yeah, that's a great thought.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think that for me, one of the things that I've been thinking through, and Carlos, I this was a thought of something I just think is so valuable in what you're doing, is that I think for me, what I've come to realize, like when I walked through 2020, which is like this moment that lives in time, there's a lot of dynamics happening. But one of them I just came to realize is it forced me to address, is there any fear of man in me? And I just want to say this to pastors.
What was the answer?
The amount.
What'd you find?
Weeping on my back porch at 1 a.m. many nights in a row, right? And I just want to say, because there were these moments where I was gripped by, if I say blank, then I know blank is going to happen. Yeah. If I say blank, then I know blank is going to happen. And some of them were genuine in the sense that these are gray areas that I didn't exactly know the complexity. It's not that I had a deep conviction and I didn't want to be faithful to it. It's that I was trying to enter into a space with grace and understanding that I didn't fully, have a great grip over. But then there was this recognition that there were things that just deep in my heart that I had hesitation around. And it's because I had to see it for what it was, that I had placed, that I trusted my ability to keep people with me as part of my fruitfulness, rather than actually going, I'm going to, from my heart, I'm going to stand rightly before the Lord. And I just recognized that in those seasons, something had drifted that I couldn't see. And then this is the power of pain, right? Pain always tells you what you trust. You always run to what you trust in pain. And I found in 2020, part of what I ran to was trying to keep people close because I trusted that. Wow. And it helped me realize that there were lines of fear of man that ultimately I had to break. And I really did. When that happened, when I actually saw it, gave it to the Lord, owned it, repented for it, accepted the consequences of it, and trusted God to build that, some things shifted some things really shifted in my own life. And I do think there is a fear of man that we have to see in the midst of this. I also, and this is kind of recently I was actually in Iceland with John, my friend John, and we were going on a ferry over to this little part called the Westman Islands. And we got into the line we think we were supposed to be on. We bought our tickets. It was all Icelandic. And all of a sudden, they start loading the ferry, and it's every line but ours. And it created like this real sense of, are we in the right line? Do we have the right tickets? Are we going to get on this ferry? I mean, this sense of like, do I get out of the car and go try to talk? I even at one point tried to get out of the car and try to go like, hey, are we in a wrong line? Like, we're just two Americans and trying to figure this out, right? And as soon as I got out of the car, the guy in Icelandic basically said, "Get in the car." That was my interpretation of his emotions.
There was an Icelandic, cuss word in there.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, we were like the last line for whatever. Even though we were one of the first ones in line, we were the last line to let in. But it was about 20 minutes, and it was really like, I don't know what's happening. And it was just something about that moment that reminded me that like there is a real anxiety of following somebody that you don't know if you are in the right line. Do they see you? Are you going to get on this boat? Are you there? Did you buy the right ticket? And one of the things that I feel like we need to do as pastors is at least understand that is real. And the more and more we can come towards our church and go, hey, I see you in line. I see this is where we're going on. This is how you get how we're going. This is how I actually think bringing just that little bit of clarity to our churches. Hey, when crises happen, these are our general rules. This is our convictions, and making clear like these even things. This is where we stand on this issue. This is where we stand on this issue. This is where we stand on this. And even though there's thousands that I can't do that on, the more and more I can clarify, and I can come and say, hey, I promise. We're getting on that boat together. And even if it feels like I let that line go first or that line go first, I see you.
We're going.
And I just feel like there's something as pastors, that's part of our role. We have to. And even when we clarify, if that means some people are like, this is not my boat.
Right.
We just,
at least there was clarity.
At least there. And I think on my heart, because I'm saying to this pastors, your heart deserves to be cared for in a way that I think that will only bring clarity.
Carlos, thank you for joining us, man. I appreciate you actually jumping into our conversation and hanging out with us. Means the world to me. I know awesome. I know all that's going on with you right now in a good way, positive. It sounds negative. I know you got a lot.
I know what's happening.
I know what's happening, Carlos.
I know why you just went offline for 5 weeks.
I know what you did last summer.
Okay.
But I will say this for everybody. I mean this, Carlos. I just appreciate you. I appreciate your voice. I appreciate you pushing the areas that you're pushing and being a friend in the areas you're being a friend, and people should go follow you. You're an author. You got books coming out, and also you're not just doing you're not just out there doing social justice issues. Some of the most fun I've seen on Instagram is the people that are giving to piano players and the people that are giving to families. And so a lot of people have asked me, because I actually am not sure you can do social media well. I've had this conversation. I'm like, I don't know who's doing it. And so people ask me, they're like, is there anybody doing social media well? And I'm like, I think Carlos is. Like, this is literally my answer. I'm like, I think Carlos is. Outside of that, I think a whole bunch of social media is just narcissistic in nature, and it's really cool pictures of us inviting people to church. And
angled just right.
So whatever.
You're preaching shot with your best quote.
Bro.
I got you, preacher. I got you, preacher.
But I definitely am like, I definitely have appreciated how you've done social media, and not again, it's not just pushing all the social justice, which is important, by the way. I have a deep value in. But also, I just love what you've done. So, thank you for joining us. That you guys, you'll have to tell them what's your Instagram handle?
Yeah, low sweat. When is this podcast coming out? Do you even know? Like, is this
coming out in the next few months?
Yeah. In the next. Well, listen. Then I'll go ahead and give a plug. I have my next book is coming out in January.
Yes,
and it's called How to Human, and a lot of what we're talking about today in this podcast is in that book.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I love it. So good. How to Human. Make sure you check it out.
You should host a time for pastors who are in the radical middle, who hold
Yeah.
to biblical convictions in a term, but yet want some help in this space, but they don't know how to find it without feeling demonized. I'm just telling you, so many pastors, if they knew they could step into somewhere and go, hey, this is a non-negotiable, this is a non-negotiable, this is a non-negotiable, somebody, but I want to step in.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, Carlos, the radical middle needs some champions.
And I will
it.
say this, that, and we've got to go right now, but I will say this, that I think that creating spaces where pastors can actually have some conversations without feeling like they're going to be out of bounds.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like pastors being able to go like, I actually don't agree, or I think that's wrong, even though they may be wrong.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard about this thing.
good.
This maybe you was talking about that. Like, if we can't talk about being a racist in church, where are you going to talk about it?
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? If you can't actually go, well, this is actually what I believe, then, you know what I'm saying? To be able to process that, to be able to talk about that, to be able to challenge that, you know. So I love what you're doing. All right, Carlos, it was great seeing you, my man. Thanks for jumping on with
All
us.
right. Hey, thanks, Oz. Thanks, Phil.
Hey, nice to meet you,
Thanks,
Carlos.
Manning. Love you guys.
Well, I tell you what, man, we probably could have talked a lot longer, and there's probably a lot of other issues we could have jumped into and all that type of stuff. But just as we wrap up today, Oz, you got any last thoughts just as we're kind of sitting there talking, and any last thoughts for pastors or?
If you're a pastor and you listen to this, I think it's okay to not know and not have all the answers. Give yourself grace. I think the biggest advice I would give is just walk with people, live with people, do life with people. We could do a little bit better at responding and not reacting to things. So, but this has been good for me. It's been good for my soul, man.
I love it,
Just
dude.
hearing this
And I think the
talking.
fight for all of us is not to get a jaded heart, not to get a hurt heart, not to get a cold heart, but to keep a tender heart.
Yeah.
And confidence. I even love what you're talking about, like pastoring a church that doesn't all look like you. You've kind of had to become confident. Like the ability to stay tender, not arrogant, and yet not insecure.
Yeah.
Like that kind of mix of like, I have a tender heart, I'm confident, I don't think I'm right in everything, I'm not arrogant, you know, that kind of space. I think we can get there, which will help us navigate this. So hey guys, listen, thank you for jumping on Pastors Podcast Season 3, part of the Jesus Culture Podcast Network. Listen, there's Season 1, there's Season 2. There's also a lot of great interviews and conversations in Season 3. But listen, we're just grateful that you take some time with us. And let us know, man. Reach out to us. We love DMs. We love, if you want to see Oz getting just electrocuted, doing Tough Mudder. These are all the things. So it's good having you guys with us.
My first move.